Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Built Heritage Subcommittee. We're going to get started. We have no regrets to date. Any declarations of interest? Nope. I see none. Can we confirm the minutes of our meeting on Thursday, the 2nd of August, 2018? Are they carried? Carried. Great. Thank you. So we have two substantive items on our agenda for which we have speakers on both items. The first relates to the renovation of the original house and construction of a rear addition at 119 York Street, and we're going to have a presentation, and as I said, there are speakers for that item. And then our second item is an application to alter the Medical Arts Building at 180 Metcalfe Street. Lastly, when we get to other business, we're going to have a staff update on Somerset House, but we'll get to that later in the agenda. So given that there are speakers on both items, we're not going to pass either on consent, and we'll go to our first item, which, as I said, relates to 119 York Street, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We're going to start with a brief update from staff, and then we'll go to our public delegations.
Sorry, colorblind. Right. Good morning, everyone. This application is for the alteration to a designated property at 119 York Street in the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District. The proposal includes demolition of non-historic rear additions, the construction of a new rear addition, some restoration work on the original house, and landscape modifications. The property is located on the north side of York Street between Dalhousie Street and Cumberland Street, close to the eastern boundary of the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District. The original building is in relatively good condition, with most heritage architectural elements intact, including the cornerstone coins, the corbelled window surrounds, decorative barge board, and the curved finial. The original windows on the front facade have been replaced recently with unsympathetic contemporary windows, which are not fitted properly to the original slightly arched openings, as seen in the middle photograph above. If you look at the photo to the right, the original form and massing of the heritage house is clearly visible, extending to the rear about 10 meters. In this photo, a portion of the one-story rear addition that is to be demolished is visible. The streetscape of the north side of York Street in this part of the district is dominated by low-rise residential structures with a character that has evolved over the decades to include a mix of both residential and commercial uses. The subject property is in the middle of this photo. The photo on the left indicates the current state of the front yard, as well as the public right-of-way in front of 119 York Street. Although there is a healthy mature tree seen in the photo above, the space is otherwise dominated by deteriorating pavement, an informal parking spot, and a fence surrounding the private patio. The photo on the right shows the shared driveway that separates the subject property from its western neighbor. The two-story horse stable is visible in the distance, along with the seven-story condo building in the background. The existing conditions in front of the subject property are contrasted by the well-landscaped public space located in the right-of-way immediately to the west of 119 York Street and extending to the intersection of York and Dalhousie. As mentioned earlier in this presentation, the existing rear additions are to be removed. They are one story in height and are identified in the plan above. These additions do not have cultural heritage value. The site plan shows the removal of the existing rear additions, the retention of the original structure, the new 2.5-story rear addition, and considerable landscape interventions both on the subject property, the adjacent property with which the driveway is shared, and on the public realm located in front of the building. The landscape initiatives are to add ground-cover plantings around the existing mature tree, to add an oval-shaped garden in front of the property, and to replace the asphalt driveway in its entirety with brick pavers. These pavers will also extend into the neighboring courtyard that separates the horse stable from the next-door residence. The intent of this landscape work is, in part, to improve the heritage streetscape and extend the positive public realm experience along York Street further east from this intersection. This image shows the proposal from across the street. The rear addition is visible beyond a small break on the west facade. The secondary entrance to the retail space and the accessory offices is also visible on the left side of the building, toward the back. All facades visible from the street or from the condo building to the rear are to be clad in aged red brick to match the existing cladding material. This rendering shows the building from York Street looking west. The addition is not visible from this perspective. The architectural elements of the facade are to remain, with new fitted wood windows to replace the existing windows. The front and rear elevations highlight the scale of the new addition, which is subordinate and complementary to the original building by virtue of being lower with a matched roof form and pitch. The rear elevation shows a red brick living wall where it's exposed above the first floor. The drawing indicates the planting of English ivy from within a planter box on this rear wall. This west elevation shows the extent of the addition to the rear, with the original building identified on the right. Should have brought a pointer. There are 4 transom-style windows proposed for the side of the addition, and 1 window to be added to the original building. All new windows are to be wood-framed. 3 skylights are proposed for the addition, with 2 proposed on the original building. The purpose of the skylights is to bring light into the upper floor of the building. The portion of the addition where the building abuts the side property line is proposed to be clad in vertical metal siding. This portion of the addition is located immediately adjacent to the stable next door, and this wall will not be visible. There are no windows proposed on the east elevation, and the proposed cladding material is vertical metal siding. This facade of the addition is not visible from the streetscape. Staff finds the proposals to be in line with the principles and conforming with the guidelines of the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District. The continued evolution of this property from its original residential use to its transformation to a restaurant and cafe over the past couple decades, and finally to the proposed retail use, helps to tell the story of the layered and diverse character of the Byward Market and its adapted building stock. By locating the addition to the rear, the proposed adaptive reuse of the property conserves the original form, massing, and architectural expression of the original house. Replacing the unsympathetic windows with wood windows to fit the original openings, which are sound versions of the original windows in terms of size, form, materials, and detailing, is consistent with the applicable conservation guidelines of the plan. The project is consistent with Parks Canada standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in the following ways. The original heritage building and its architectural elements have been preserved, along with the original massing of the building. Located at the rear and slightly set in, the addition is distinguishable from the original house, yet compatible in terms of the brick cladding, as well as its roof form and pitch. The change of use to retail and the addition to the building are accommodated without changing the character-defining elements of the property. The non-historic additions are being removed. Slight change to the order of the slides here, but I just want to discuss that a summary of the heritage permit application was circulated to adjacent property owners within 35 meters of the subject property, to the ward councillor, and to Heritage Ottawa, and to the Lowertown Community Association as well. Staff is aware of concerns that have been brought forth, which relate to the impacts of the proposed addition on adjacent properties. Revisions to the proposed designs were submitted yesterday, and they are summarized as follows. The windows proposed on the south elevation have been reduced in size, so 5 transom windows are now proposed in order to address privacy concerns on the adjacent property to the west. The Shaw brick pavers on the shared driveway between the subject property and the property at 113 to 115 York, the horse stable is located, is now to extend into the courtyard of that property. On the rear facade, the red brick is to replace the originally proposed metal cladding. English ivy is also proposed as a visual mitigation measure, creating a living wall facing the existing condo building. The roof pitch of the proposed addition has been slightly lowered to reflect the roof pitch of the existing house, providing a minimal reduction in massing, as seen from the condo building to the rear. So in addition to the heritage permit, this project requires the site plan control application and a minor variance application. The final recommendation in this report provides discretion to staff, for staff to permit minor design changes should they be required. Heritage staff will continue to work closely with development review as these processes unfold. So, getting back to the recommendations, the recommendations of this report are to approve the application to demolish the existing rear additions and approve the new construction and landscape interventions in accordance with the revised plans. And by the way, the revised plans have been indicated in this presentation. Minor design changes are to be delegated to the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure, and Economic Development, and staff recommend establishing a 2-year expiry date from the date of issuance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm going to ask the Vice Chair just to formally introduce the technical motion which brings forward these new plans which were received yesterday, which were just spoken about by staff. So, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yes, I'd like to move this technical motion that whereas the applicant has submitted revised versions of the site plan on September the 12th, be it resolved that the report recommendations 1 and 2 be amended by replacing the date of July 4th, 2018 with revised plan September 12th. I'm abridging this slightly to avoid the legal whereases. And that the discussion section of the report be amended by replacing the words, including the majority of the west facade of the 2-story front-facing bay of the addition, with and from the condominium building to the rear. And be it further resolved that the discussion section of the report be amended by deleting the words that are not visible from the street, mainly the east-north rear end portion of the west facade abutting property line, and be it further resolved that documents 2, 3, 4, and 8 of the report be replaced with the revised site plan September the 12th. And these are attached, and I hope they're up somewhere.
Okay, you're not formally moving it yet. The Vice Chair is just introducing the motion so that everybody in the room is aware of what that motion will be when we vote on it at the end of the item. But thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. We're going to move now to public delegations, and I have so far 6 on my list. And for those who are here for the first time, when I call your name, if you can come up to the front here and turn your microphone on, and every speaker has 5 minutes to speak. So we'll start with Luc Gervais, and he will be followed by Gary McLaughlin. So, Mr. Gervais. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Luc Gervais. I own 121, 123 York Street. First of all, thank you for having us, giving the opportunity to speak briefly with you this morning. My 2 biggest concerns with the proposed building are as follow. The first one is depreciation of my property value. Current use of 121, 123 York is residential. I do have a backyard back there, and it's currently used as a place of leisure for the kids to play. Where I mean the potential depreciation, I should say more specifically, I can't guarantee that's going to depreciate, but there is the likelihood of it. I've got this big structure made out of metal, for that matter, that's going to be extending the whole length of my backyard, 21 feet from ground, then there's the roof, so it's really going to close us in. It's going to almost feel like somewhat of a prison yard to that degree. And my secondary concern, which is probably the biggest concern I have, is the snow that inadvertently will fall off that roof with the pitch it has and the fact that it is a metal roof. There's going to be snow in my backyard. It's going to close off my access to emergency exit from the back of the building into the laneway. The problem with snowfall is that with the metal roof, it will fall any given time, and it will fall all of it at once. So you may end up with 2-3 feet of snow, if not more, between the 2 buildings. And on the other side, which is not my building, that's John Cundall, but he'll inadvertently have the same problem with his laneway being blocked off. So that's my biggest concern. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you very much for coming out this morning and expressing those points. I don't see any questions, so thank you. And the one thing that I will say to staff and to you is the issue of the snow building up and what happens to the snow is something you heard the staff at the end of the presentation talk about, the fact that there will be a site plan process, which essentially means that's going to be the opportunity to look at how the proposed building and the site works. So at the risk of sounding overly bureaucratic, and I'm sorry about this, but I just want to reassure you that that kind of issue, although not under consideration here, will be considered as part of the site plan, and your councillor who's here will have an opportunity to bring that issue before staff as part of site plan.
Thank you.
Okay, so next we have Gary McLaughlin, followed by Lucy Hensel.
Good morning.
Good morning and welcome.
As you indicated, my name is Gary McLaughlin. I'd like to thank the Building Heritage Subcommittee for allowing me to voice my opinion on the expansion of the Heritage Building. I live at 144 Clarence. My unit faces 119 York. When I look out my windows at the moment, I see backyards and buildings of 121, 119, 115 York, and York Street itself. When we purchased the condo, one factor in buying it was that the buildings facing us were deemed heritage. What I took from reading of the City of Ottawa heritage designation is that any alterations to these buildings would focus on three areas: streetscape, character of the neighborhood, and most importantly, character of the building itself. With this information, I did not think I would be presented with my view to be limited to a 34-foot high wall less than 2 feet from my patio. Looking at the application, it does seem to meet one heritage criterion, the streetscape, but that's the only one. The proposal is asking to take one of the most beautiful single-family homes in the market and turn it into a warehouse. The massive size of the expansion dwarfs and removes all the character of a single-family house. It's a warehouse. There's no semblance of single-family home left. To finish up, I believe the committee needs to weigh the needs of all the members of the community affected by the tea house project. Not only does the project have to keep its front elevation in keeping with heritage requirements, but it's the size and use have to be in keeping with the surrounding owners. Extending the current tea house to a commercial-sized project presented does not strike an appropriate balance of all affected. In the same way, the committee could not support a front elevation that is not keeping with heritage considerations, it should also not accept modifications that would significantly negatively affect surrounding occupants. Again, thank you for allowing me to voice my concerns.
Thank you for coming out this morning. I see no questions from members, so thank you for coming out. And we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Lucy Hensel, who will be followed by John Kundal. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting us to voice our opinions. Mine is similar to Gary's. I am a resident of 144 Clarence. I'm not going to be as directly affected as he is because my unit is higher up. But I am equally concerned for the impact this will have on the immediate neighbors lower down. Not just Gary, but even 2 floors above him will be significantly affected by the mass of the proposed extension and its proximity to our building. The loss of light, the loss of space that these residents will experience. I have equal concern for our neighbor down below, John Kundal, and what that will do to his property, but he will be defending that. But I'm very concerned that if this large addition to the rear of the Heritage Building does go through, that he will be so significantly affected that ultimately we will lose one of the wonderful heritage aspects of the market, which is his stables and the services he provides. And more, I feel we are diminishing the quality of life in the market based on its heritage massing and space, and the sense that these original houses, I appreciate that it's being kept and in fact improved from the streetscape, but part of the whole neighborhood lives off these backyard spaces and the feeling of how it was that the backyards, I agree, were being used, but they were not being built up, and the density of building to me is excessive for this area and for in keeping with the heritage quality of our neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? No, I see none. Thank you very much for coming out. So next on the list is John Kundal, to be followed by Ron Smith. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having us here. I guess my neighbors said a lot, so it was pretty good. The only concern really I have is the size of the building, and building right on the property line that I can't repair my stable or anything. And with the height, I don't know how much air is going to be going into our stable for the horses, because it might be boxed off and we won't get no sun. So that's my biggest concern is if I can't keep the horses there, well, we'll have to move, but it's part of heritage more than the houses, you know what I mean? So that's the biggest concern, and they raised all the points that I was going to say, so it's no issue repeating it.
Okay, if you just hold on one sec, I see Councillor Fleury has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kundal, we know each other well. Maybe you could take a few seconds just to talk about the uses of the stable. So the stable has been in the market for how long?
We've been in business 130 years. At that location, we're about 80 years.
80 years. And maybe you could give us kind of a general, what are your operations there? How many horses? What's the function of the stable there?
Okay, we keep 2 draft horses to do rides on the market and in the areas like Overbrook, Rockcliffe, Manor Park, Carnivals. And we have 6 little miniatures that we have a handicapped man comes in every day and walks them in the park, and it's a big attraction for the market. You must get 100 pictures every day taken of them. And with the horses, I mean, you put a lot of smile on people's faces. And it's been a family business for 130 years. So I think it's one of the oldest businesses in Ottawa owned by the same family for that length of time.
So correct me where I'm wrong, but your concern, you're not opposed to the retail use, you don't even have an issue to, you seem very comfortable with the brand and so on, and the heritage protection of the facade. Your concern is with the addition and the impact on what that would mean for the stable operations and also with access. So you haven't really explained that, and you and I, when you met, you were quite concerned around safety relating to that right-of-way access.
Yeah, it's a right-of-way laneway, and if they got a door in the back, and I don't know if there's going to be a handicap door or what it's going to be at the back, because you don't know until it's done. And people will be coming in and out of the laneway. So if somebody slips and falls, whose responsibility is it if I have a joint laneway with these people? I don't want to be sued for their customers going in and out of their yard. And there is a big problem with ice and snow on the roof that's there now, because it builds up there and then it comes down all at once, and it's about half a ton of snow and ice coming down onto the laneway. So you just got to be careful. We always walk on our side, because if it comes down, at least you got a foot that it's not going to hit you.
And just briefly, so you have an existing right-of-way agreement, or the property next to you has a right-of-way agreement, which you acknowledge. You've had working relationships with the neighbors for years. But tell me around, you've explained to me that now the fences are locked on a general basis just to prevent access to the back and safety for the horses and residents, right?
Yeah, there's a gate in front, and we lock it every night because there's a lot of street people go in the yard and do things, and kids from the bars go in there and urinate and all that stuff, so we lock it. And also, if there's people going in and out that we don't know, like we have pretty well much control of it, and the stable door is open and they have kids and they go into the stable without permission and a pony bites them or something like that, you know what I mean? You're taking all their privileges away right there, you know. And also, I know the bylaw is that you can build on the line, like a property line, but they're building right against the stable at one point. And there's a place in the back of our stable that's about 4 feet wide or 3 feet wide that we store stuff. And the same with them. If they build and there's 2 feet left over, who's going to clean all that dirt that goes in there, leaves and stuff, you know, that somebody could start fires. People get into places that you don't think they're going to get into. And but if the property was moved over a little bit from my line at the stable, well, then there'd be more air, I think, would go into the stable, because we have a fan, exhaust fan, that goes onto the other property, but it's been there for 45 years, and we never had a complaint.
Right.
So if the building's going to be only 3 or 4 feet, like, if you look at the planning, they don't give you much dimensions where the building's going to continue in, and this way, behind, tight to the stable, we don't even know what that width is. And now the existing building goes down, and then the building they want to tear down is about 16 inches inward. You see, it's not on that plan. You see where the existing building is? Well, it comes down, and it goes in 16 inches, and then the new building starts.
Okay, any more questions? I don't have a question to Mr. Cunningham anymore, but I do have questions to staff. Is it best to hold them at the end?
Let's hold, because we've got a couple more speakers, but I know Councillor Moffat has a question for Mr. Cunningham.
Thank you. Just had a question for you. Just in your discussion with Councillor Fleury, you mentioned that you were there for 80 years in the current location?
Yeah.
What was the impact of 144 Clarence when it was built on your property? Because it was a vacant parcel about 25 years ago.
There was a store there with a residential house, and there was a parking lot right beside it.
In the back?
Yeah.
And then now it's redeveloped as a fairly large condo building directly.
But they're in from our line, they're in the deck. There must be 20 feet in. Then the building goes up. So there's a flow of air coming through there. Like, the building's not built. The whole building, the residential part of it, is not right to the back. There's a parking lot, and then there's a deck where Gary is, and then the building starts to go up.
Okay.
There's a garage, and then there's a deck on top of the garage.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Cundill, for coming out.
Thank you.
Next on our list is Ron Smith, and Mr. Smith will be followed by David Flemming. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, committee. I'm glad to be able to be here. I don't know if I can answer every question. My name's Ron Smith. I'm the architect and planner for this project for our clients. And I can probably only, I didn't expect to speak, so maybe what I'll do is try to answer some of the questions. I don't think I have a solution for everybody's requirements and needs, but I can probably address some of the major things that I've just seen here, and I've just jotted some of these items down. One, I think, is, this came up a couple of times, is the impact on snow. And snow, in fact, collected on our roofs, and then all the snow basically dissipates on the adjacent properties. Simply, whether it's an asphalt roof or a metal roof, we like the roof the way it is because it reflects the original heritage slope roof. But certainly, in our experience, we can basically stop a lot of the snow from sliding off using snow guards, etc. And that's a fairly appropriate way of handling the snow until the snow melt goes off. And in fact, I think the city will probably require that for just storm water management. Snow just simply be as another form of water. So I think, in fact, we can control that and control the rate of snow coming off those roofs on either side of the building. And in fact, it's going to be as much a problem for us on our shared easement between ourselves and the stables. So it's going to be a concern that basically will be a shared concern within the neighborhood, and certainly with our most appropriate neighbor here, which is the stable side. Retaining the building as it is and the small section of the heritage section of the building, our client does need to have some space in the back and for the retail sales and storage. So one of the things here, we're looking at the uses, and certainly when you're looking at heritage structures, one of the most problematic concepts here of being able to renovate and reuse these structures is having a very sustainable sort of use for the project. Right now, it's a small office area and a cafe, and understandably, they've had a very large lot here, but they, in terms of their business, weren't able to basically sustain the property, maintain the property, and our client has the means to do it, and I think we're not only bringing the retail, which is a nice mixed use to this street, but also we're able to have the means to actually renovate the building in the form that we're able to do. And in terms of the heritage section, we're trying to do that as best as we can. The rear of the building, certainly maybe not the most economical in facing the condo. I do have a little concerns of ourselves. Also, the way that it was actually looked at. Our original drawings showed something around 35 feet high, but the reality is the condominium, and I'm not sure how much thought they gave putting in an 11-foot high wall. It's an unmitigated concrete wall that faces our property, and in fact, when you extend our building rear addition on the back, it's only about a story and a half. So the reality is we're not looking at a full 35-foot high wall. We're going to be looking at about a story and a half building, which is about a shed size rather than a two-story building. The second thing was that we did consider that the exterior should have some kind of texture and enlightenment rather than the simple steel structure that we were putting on there. And it's a maintenance thing as well. So thinking about this, certainly we have brick in the front. Brick in the rear seems very appropriate. And we can actually use a recycled brick to give it certainly giving a heritage look, so it's not just a concrete block. And we're allowing ourselves the idea of putting in a fast-growing English ivy that will allow that actually to grow up against the rear facade. And I think generally that's not a bad attractive option than looking at our original proposal for just some kind of galvanized metal. So I think that's not a very attractive way of actually treating it. At this point, from the city's point of view, I don't think we have any obligation to do anything more than that, but in terms of pushing it back, I don't see there's any great that would actually restrict the second floor area that we actually have. So dealing with the existing structure, the small front building, it's not really geared to retail, so all our opportunity for retail is going to be in the back, so we're trying to optimize that location.
Mr. Smith, I'm sorry.
The front of the building.
Mr. Smith? Oh, sorry, your time is up, so I'm going to have to stop you there, but there are a number of questions. So
I will say I can take questions now because I'm sure there's going to be a number of other things.
So maybe I'll start by asking about the minor variances that you're going to be seeking. And one of the important things to note, which again is always ends up sounding bureaucratic, but it's a reality and important for those who are in this room. There are, as it happens, 3 decision points. There's the heritage permit, which is before us here this morning. Separately, you are applying for a minor variance, and relief from the overlay at the Committee of Adjustment, and I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. And thirdly, there will be site plan approval.
Correct.
But for the sake of clarity, and so that people around this table and people in the room can understand, what variances will you be seeking at the Committee of Adjustment? Can you just review those? Not that it's relevant to the heritage permit. Unfortunately, it's not, but I think it's important context for people to understand what you're going to be seeking at the Committee of Adjustment.
I think mainly, just to simplify it, there's actually on the, and I would think it would be the northwest side against the apartment building, we're actually asking to go out about around 20 inches, 2 feet closer to that property line. Technically, the usual requirement is to actually bring the wall back to the inside face of that rear addition. So we're asking to actually get closer to the property line in order to increase our interior space. One of the other reasons we are doing that is because on the, I would call it the stable side, we're very restricted by an existing easement. That easement doesn't allow us to actually build right to our property line, but also it will restrict the amount of square footage that we do have and the opportunity to build on the back addition. So essentially, it is that rear northwest elevation. As you can see, it's at the top of the page. I think there's a dimension up there. I can't really read it. So on the northwest, it's actually about a foot. Yeah.
So you're going to be requesting a zero setback at the northwest corner of the lot line? I just want to be clear.
Yes, at that one location. But as you can see, the wall will not follow the property line. It will actually be 90 degrees to the rear. So it goes from, let's see. Right there, yeah. Right there, that's only about a foot. And then coming down, it's actually 2'7" at that location, and it's about a foot off that line. But the actual wall will basically follow, let's see. This little guy is not really, yeah, there we go, get along there. So the variance will be that section, that little piece, that rectangle, right along that line right there.
Okay, thank you. I know Member Smallwood had a question.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions. One thing I wanted to say is that this is, I think, one of the best buildings in that block, one of the best buildings in the market. It's a beautiful building, and I'm really delighted to see your plans to preserve and conserve the front of the building. I think that's really excellent. And I noticed in the report that you're keeping the finial and barge board trim. I was over at the building yesterday to look at it, and I see they're quite weathered, but I assume that you will be doing conservation work on them. It won't be a case of at some point you say, oh, they're worn, they need to be replaced. I'm assuming that's...
Well, yeah. I mean, my client has that. Part of their mandate is within the recycle reuse. In many cases, the projects that my client group actually undertakes, they would rather go in and invest in a community development, heritage development, and recycle reuse.
So they will
as part of their mandate, part of the corporate mandate. So
the other thing I wondered is that the 2 points were raised, one about the gates and the other about the vent. Would your clients be prepared to pay to relocate the vent for Mr. Kundal so that it's not pointing out the side, it points out the front of his property instead of the side, and also relocate the gates to the further back so that they still protect the rear yard?
We actually have no problem with the gates. In fact, we would like to have them
wrap
around.
Relocate.
Actually, that's never been an issue. And if we have a chance after this meeting later on today, we plan on meeting some of the neighborhood. So I have no problem with the gate goes here or here. That's part of the discussion. I must say that one of the things here for the committee is that this is a shared liability. We have just as much of an issue with the liability from horses as we would protecting our own public and our own clientele. We do plan to bring in the public, though, through a main door right off the street. And in fact, this will be limited to a service-orientated use. The second item here is the vents, and I believe we've already accommodated the vent in question, or at least we can place vents. We've taken the building back at least 2.5 feet at this location, so the stable vents, we're trying to enable and maintain those uses at that location. So we've already made that adjustment.
Okay, so I just want to confirm, in either event, you will bear the cost of addressing those two issues.
Yeah,
satisfaction.
basically it's required and necessary. We will do that. Yeah. And the same with the paving in here. We will have a discussion with our neighbor. In fact, the type of granite that we would be looking at would be urban-based, not a flat granite, so that generally there is a discussion about more of a European pattern of stones to accommodate the hooves of the horses, etc. So that's all been I don't think that's a no-brainer. That's pretty simple.
Okay,
And
thank you
also
very much.
justice for slippage, etc.
You have a question? Question from Member Podolsky.
Question for Ron Smith. I've been listening to the proposal and the comments of your neighbors, and while I like the idea that you're creating a pitched roof building that is sympathetic to the existing building, one thing you did not make clear, which I really need to understand, is are you looking for any rear yard setback? Can you, as of right, build to the rear property line right now, or are you asking a variance for that?
No, we're not asking for a variance. I believe we can build a commercial use right to the property lines, all the property lines, except for where we are required to maintain the easement with our adjacent neighbor and stables.
So at the present time, the easement goes right to the back property line?
Right.
So Mr. Kendall has the right to use that area?
That easement doesn't go to the back of the property. We've stopped our shed actually at the end of the easement.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, we have. It's shown on one of the drawings.
And just one more question for you. Usually when we get proposals, the way in which the building is ventilated and exhausted, heat and cooled is shown. What you're showing is an addition which shows no mechanical ventilation vents, cooling equipment or anything like that. Is it building, it's a retail building, is it?
It's a retail building. I think we just hadn't got to that stage. We're thinking our process right now has been purely on the planning side. In the upcoming weeks, as we go through this, we'll be thinking, we've already met with our civil engineer today, and we will be looking at the mechanical and the electrical requirements that will go into this building. At this point, we haven't had that discussion with our consultants, so that's to be discussed.
Because it would seem to me that the neighbors on all sides, who are concerned about the visual appearance of it, when they find out what your rooftop heating units or what your vents are going to look like, that's going to alter their experience of this addition quite substantially. And I'm surprised that that hasn't been included in the submission, because it's so obvious that it's going to be a visual intervention. But anyway,
But we can advise planning staff, and probably will, now that you brought that up. We'll definitely take a look at it. And as we get more information, then we'll do that. So thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for coming out. Thank you. And next, and our final speaker on this item is David Flemming. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. I'm speaking on behalf of Heritage Ottawa. This is a challenging project, and while we applaud the applicant for the modest intervention and their willingness to do a sensitive rehabilitation of the existing building, heritage building, we do have some concerns about the project as a whole. Excuse me. A few weeks ago, this committee considered an application for development on the south side of York Street. And at that time, it was noted that that particular area of the Heritage Conservation District has been sort of given away for development that did not follow the existing guidelines. And with the idea that the north side of York Street would remain, at least of the streetscape, similar to what it looks like now, and would be modest retail and perhaps residential. We have a problem with the addition. Given what has been given up on the south side, why not just say, okay, we're going to restore the existing building, we're going to demolish the modern addition, and not do anything else. So that's a trade-off. The trade-off is not being, you're going to go to the Committee of Adjustment to try to build a larger addition in the back, which, as we heard from the neighbors, is going to cause some distress, especially the ones who live on York Street. And I think what we have to try to do is to look at some of these developments and, from a heritage standpoint, not what we're going to give up, but what we're going to gain. And I think by keeping the building as it is, and by following the plans to conserve and preserve the existing building, I think is a positive thing. But why not say, okay, we're going to look at the backyard, not what we can get away with by putting a massive addition that goes to the property line. And I don't have too much of a problem with the height, although the height is a problem. But the fact that as of right, the applicant can do this under the commercial guidelines or zoning of the area is of some concern. If we're really going to be serious about preserving the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District. So I think rather than looking for what we can bend the rules to do, what we should be doing is easing off on the idea of looking for variances and to try to preserve this north side of York Street in this particular block to the as a reflection of what the Built Heritage Conservation District should be. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Flemming? Member Smallwood?
Thank you. It's not often I disagree with you, but I think I'm going to disagree with you here. I'm concerned that you're suggesting that the owner of a heritage building should have their rights removed from any development rights. You seem to be saying that you're suggesting that we would support removing all development rights from the person who owns the heritage property and let people on the other side of the street go ahead and get all the development rights. So I'm very concerned about that, and I hope that's not what you're suggesting, because it certainly, to me, would send a very negative message out to the owners of historic buildings.
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. What I am suggesting is that what the city should be trying to do is to encourage proponents and developers of these properties not to be looking for these variances, and to try to find people who are willing to keep it as they are, and to totally reflect the heritage nature of the neighborhood. I agree with you. There has to be some incentive there, but maybe there are also people out there who would be willing to just abide by the rules as they are, and that's what we should be encouraging. Thank you.
If I can just follow up, we're not dealing with the variances here. So that's a separate issue altogether. We're dealing with the idea of building an addition. So the issue of variances, whether it requires a variance or not, is not what we're talking about here.
Yes, no, I agree.
It's not a case of bending rules.
No, but what I'm saying is that what we should be doing is encouraging people to develop them so that you don't have to do variances. That's basically what I'm saying. It's a much higher level, I guess, proposal or opinion rather than just looking at this particular one.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask to clarify, is Heritage Ottawa supporting or opposing this application?
No, we support the application. We think it's a very good application from a heritage perspective, and I think it should be used as a model for the type of development that is done here. We do, though, have a problem with the consequences of it and the consequences of how it goes for site plan approval. But that's a general problem.
Thank you for the clarification, and thank you for coming out this morning. So that exhausts our speakers list. So if there are any questions or comments to staff at this stage, I see Member Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question about Chair Nussbaum referenced that the proponent is looking for an exemption from the overlay. Can you elaborate on what that's going to entail, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The underlying zoning of this property is MD, which is a downtown commercial zone, but the heritage overlay does apply on the property. And the heritage overlay requires a 60-centimeter inset of a new addition to the original structure. So, as Mr. Smith was pointing out, there's a requirement for relief from that provision here, as well as here. As I understand, that's plus or minus 14 inches, so about 8. It's a little bit short, 6 inches short or so here. You need 2 feet essentially. So there's a technical requirement, the way that the rear yard setback provision is written in the heritage overlay section of the zoning bylaw. It does refer to the underlying zoning to determine the rear yard setback, which in this case is 0, as well as the side yard setback. However, the way the provision is written, it does say that in no case can the setback be less than 3 meters. So there's a technical requirement to request relief from that. So we do.
Is that just on the west side, or is that all around?
That's at the rear.
That's at the rear?
Yes.
Okay, so the rear.
The north setback here.
Okay.
So there's essentially
3 meters.
Three points of the project that require 2 separate variances.
This just clarifies a point that I think that Mr. Smith, an answer to, I don't know whose question it was. But I also just briefly wanted to follow that up by asking if the heritage within the Heritage Conservation District for this area, does it reference in any way the adjoining backyards as a character-defining element, about the open space and interconnection of backyards?
There is, Mr. Chair, there is a reference to determining appropriate heights and setbacks based on the adjacent heritage properties. Mm-hmm. So if we look, in this case, we have 2 adjacent sort of contributing heritage properties, one here, the horse stable property, and that has a 0 rear yard setback and a 0 side yard setback. We do also have the residential building here. So there is a rear yard setback here, but the policy does say to sort of determine appropriate setbacks based on adjacent properties.
So immediate adjacent, or the block, or how are you interpreting it?
So it says adjacent. So in this particular context, we're looking at the adjacent property to the west that also has a 0 rear yard setback. But the issue of determining the appropriateness of the setback is something that we understand will go through the minor variance process as well. So we've determined that this setback is appropriate given the adjacent property to the west and also the 0 setback of the the first floor of the condo building to the north.
Okay, thank you for being quite specific in your answer. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Councillor Fleury.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions, and I'll start with the broader one, which is, I believe there is at times a conflict between the goals of the HCD in an area like the Byron Market and the neighboring MD zone. And I'd love to hear from staff on the specifics of how Mr. Willis in the past had said that the MD zone would be reviewed. We know that there's active applications within the MD zone, which permits a lot of height and a lot of density. And I want to understand how overall staff are seeing the MD zone being complementary to the HCD zone, and if there needs to be amendments to create a bit of a buffer. It's more of a general comment, but it indirectly applies to this application. As you know, I believe the MD zone, that's the last property of that on that block for the MD zone. And the MD zone allows for lot line to lot line building, as you know. So I don't know who's best positioned to speak to those references of how do we feel that the MD and the Heritage Conservation District zones live with one another, and is there conflict overall, and is it something that we should be careful of, not necessarily specific to this application, but overall where the border is?
Mr. Chair, in the sense that the heritage permit application does require us to do a thorough analysis of the property based on the district guidelines, and also we apply the standards for heritage, the standards and guidelines for heritage conservation, the Parks Canada document I'm referring to. Staff does feel that the analysis of the project is sufficient to ensure, despite the underlying zoning, that the proposal is appropriate from a heritage conservation perspective.
Yeah, and I'm not, maybe Mr. Curry can speak to, we have an application in front of us. I have a few questions related to the application, but overall the theme here is there a conflict between the MD zone and the HCD zone in your mind, and is going forward, what's the plan for the MD zone? Because is there an opportunity to give it some character that reflects the themes that we're trying to establish in the HCD zone for the Byron Market?
Councillor, as Mr. Maloney said, I think that the level of analysis that we can undertake in the HCD provided by the HCD plan mitigates some of the challenges of the MD zone. That being said, my understanding is, as you've pointed out, the MD zone in 2018, with its minimal setbacks and adjacencies, does cause conflict within the neighborhood, and so that will be something that I'll be discussing with Mr. Smith and Mr. Willis as in terms of the future of the MD zone as a zoning tool.
Okay. Thank you. Now, specific to this application, we've had this conversation, but I want to make sure it's public, and I want to understand it as well. We have existing heritage uses. We have an application for which, generally, as highlighted by Mr. Smallwood, is good. It's a heritage building, and they're bringing forward an application to protect that. The concerns are mainly to existing, what I'll describe as quote-unquote heritage uses of the stables and its impact to the additions. And I want to know how that's factored in this application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The functionality of an adjacent use the impacts have not been specifically analyzed in terms of, in this case, how the horse stable may continue to function. There is recognition, of course, that is an existing land use adjacent to this property, but it's the direct impact on the functionality of that stables is outside the realm of sort of the review from staff in terms of this proposal. As mentioned previously, there is a site plan application and minor variance application that would hopefully address very particular concerns that might relate to the impacts on adjacent land use.
So from a department point of view, you're only looking at it from a building and how that reflects the HCD and not necessarily on, you believe that the impacts to the adjacent uses are site plan matter? Is that kind of a fair assessment?
Mr. Chair, we do look at the existing character of the streetscape, and it is our goal to ensure that the character of the streetscape isn't compromised. So in this case, it's a low-rise residential streetscape along the north side of York Street. So by virtue of building the addition to the rear and building an addition that's lower than the original building, we do feel that the character is protected in a sense, and there is recognition within the Byward Market Plan that there's an evolution of uses within the district. So in this case, what were residential properties, there have been some turnover to commercial use, and it does reflect that sort of character within the Byward Market of sort of adaptive reuse of buildings. So in that sense, the project was analyzed through that lens, and we're comfortable that the character has been preserved.
So just as a final wrap-up for me, Mr. Chair, if you wouldn't mind, retail uses in the Byward Market are extraordinarily important, and seeing an organization like Patagonia come in and invest in the area is very important, and protecting the heritage is very important. I don't blame it on them. I blame it on the lot line to lot line zoning, and I wish that the applicant were to propose a rear yard step back that would correct two elements. One, which is the existing residential uses on the other side, but also freeing up some light and air for the existing heritage uses. So I will continue to pursue that. They reflect my comments as part of this application. Again, it's a challenge where you have an existing use that we're trying to protect in terms of the stable. At the same time, it is a sensible protection of that property. The addition, in my mind, goes a bit too, it's too extensive to the lot line, and I wish that the applicant would come back and provide some relief there for the uses, but also for the residential neighbors. I believe, they seem to be trying to find a solution that would be moving the vent, that would be the fences, which I believe to be a good step, but I'd ask the applicant to consider some relief off the lot line. So that would be my comment relating to this application.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up a bit on that idea, Mr. Chair, because it affects not just this area, but every area of the city that has a heritage designation. And it's part of the weaknesses we have in our whole planning system. Because every time I get a plan of anything, and I get tons of them, it's only for that actual property. And I have to take a look at what's the next door. The staff say they look at it a bit, but it's minimal. I have one being built now that is next to the urban boundary. They don't want to have any place where you could ever, in the future, have a connecting link in case that ever does come into the urban area. And they did that before. It's caused huge problems. And it's a case of we don't think in our planning, and this is not your responsibility particularly. And I think those points that are being raised by Councillor Fleury are exactly that point, that we have a plot or a building or a site plan or whatever. It's not unique in its own self. It's part of a whole entity. And in this case, it's a heritage entity, so it has particular importance. And the uses have particular importance. So I don't know, it's really more, I think, for looking forward as you renew the official plan and everything else. I think there needs to be some changes made. So they have some overall statements about fits in with the neighborhood and things, but it doesn't seem to pay much attention to it. And we've had these same problems in Centertown, I know, with Councillor McKinney. I have a few in my area that have, and I'm sure probably every councillor's had some of them. If we could clarify that, because I think it would help the community to understand better what's happening if we actually looked at the whole area a little bit. when we're doing plans. And so I've actually suggested to Councillor Fleury that he checks the site plan conditions extremely carefully to make sure some of the things we've raised here today are in there, because they tend to get missed. So it's really more a job for maybe this committee to work with staff to see if we can make some improvements, which we're always doing and have already been doing over the last few years, to ensure that we actually don't lose our heritage by effectively our neglect.
Okay. Any other speakers? Mr. Vice Chair?
I'd just like to say that I support the staff report and will be voting for it. I think that the reason for it is that, as Councillor Fleury said, retail uses are not only permitted, but there is something that are difficult to introduce into the Byward Market area, and to enrich the mix of uses. I think that having a new retailer come in is a very positive thing, and the investment in this property will support the conservation of the existing building and its streetscape, which I think is a very desirable thing. The form of the addition, though it's lot to lot, is essentially permitted in this zone, and by choosing a house shape or a barn shape at the back of it, it does not detract from it. I do appreciate the comments that are made from the people that live in the 144 Clarence, but without wanting to alienate them, I'd like to say that that building, which was built, had a very negative impact on the scale of the Byward Market, and the people that live there certainly are good neighbors and benefit from the market. But I'm not that sympathetic to the concerns, and that's pretty daring of me from this position to say that. But I think that the overall project is a very good project, and I hope that the owners of Patagonia will be very, very sensitive to and support the Cundall stable operation. They have to become best friends, because that's part of the landmarks of the city. So I'll be supporting the application.
Okay. Just a final question to staff before I wrap up, which is just with regard, Mr. Maloney, you mentioned the overlay requiring a 3-meter setback. Do you think that the overlay contemplated a zone with a 0 rear yard setback? Meaning, is that perhaps a mistake in Section 60 of the zoning bylaw? Does that need to be reviewed by staff, or do you think it's appropriate the way it is?
It is, Mr. Chair, it's my understanding that there is a possibility that the 0 rear yard setback was not contemplated as a scenario, given the language of that particular provision. But when you apply grammar rules, the way it's written, you must require a 3-meter setback, right, no matter what the underlying zoning.
I just wonder if at the next opportunity when that bylaw is reviewed, if Heritage staff may want to take a look at that, because I think that was a source of some confusion, and maybe in future it won't be if that gets sorted out. Thank you for that, and the Vice Chair said much of what I wanted to say. I think evaluating this application to alter an existing heritage property under Part 5, we need to look at the Lower Town Heritage Conservation District. We need to look at the Ontario Heritage Act. Staff's advice is this is consistent with both. I would agree with that. I think also when you contemplate an adaptive reuse of this kind, there has to be a measure of acceptance that there are going to be elements of a project like this which perhaps aren't ideal in Heritage Ottawa's eyes, but are part of what one does when one contemplates adaptive reuse. And let's not forget the staff's point that we have buildings, actually 2 properties to the east, the immediate adjacent property to the west, and the property to the north, which all have a part or all of their structure right up to the rear lot line. And the existing condition of the property in question in the rear is a parking lot, which is interesting context. So that's why I too will be supporting the staff recommendation. and I'll put it before the committee now as a staff recommendation. First is the Vice Chair's technical amendment carried? Yes. Carried. And then the amended staff recommendation, is that carried? Carried. Great. Okay, thank you. And to members of the public, thank you for coming out, and you will have an opportunity to raise issues related to the setbacks at Committee of Adjustment. I'm told there isn't a date for that meeting yet, but I'm sure staff will alert you to that. Thank you for coming out. So if you can just speak to the staff afterwards. No, that's not correct. So, yeah. So you can speak to staff, but there is a Committee of Adjustment process. I'm going to move on to the next item, which is item 2 on our list, which is the application for alteration of the Medical Arts Building. Members will recall that we had this item before us early on in our term with a specific application, and now there is a application to alter 180 Metcalfe Street, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And we're going to start with a short staff presentation, and then we have members of the public who've signed up to speak. So over to staff, please, for a brief presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. You'll forgive me, I'm a bit rusty. My first one of these in a while, but the application before the committee today is an application to alter the Medical Arts Building at 180 Metcalfe Street. The property is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and it was designated on recommendation of this committee in 2015. Property is located at the northwest corner of Nepean and Metcalfe Streets. You can see in this, you can see in this photo here, the original building is here, and the rear part of the lot is currently used as a surface parking lot. At the time of designation in 2015, there was an accompanying zoning bylaw amendment that was approved for this site that contemplated a 27-story tower, 83 meters on the site, and including retention of the building. So this application that is before the committee today is to implement that plan with some changes to the approach. So the current condition of the property is the same as it was in 2015. The Medical Arts Building was constructed in 1928, designed by Werner Nopke, and is a rare and good example of the Art Deco style in Ottawa. The building is a landmark at the corner of Metcalfe and Nepean Streets and was one of the earliest purpose-built office buildings in the downtown core, and is part of a trend of medical arts buildings that were built across the country in the 1920s and 30s. The primary facades of the building are located on Nepean and Metcalfe. The secondary southern facade here is adjacent to an apartment building and is not as visible as the front and the north facade. This is looking north along Metcalfe Street. You can see the front facade of the building. We have the newly finished, or not that new, I guess, Tribeca across the street where the Sobeys is. This is looking east at the rear facade of the building. I guess the lighting in the room makes it a bit difficult to see, but here's the rear facade of the building, the existing surface parking lot, and again, the newly constructed Tribeca building across the street. So at the time of the designation, just to give a little background, the original proposal was to remove this rear facade and construct a 6-story podium attached and integrated to the existing building. The approach has changed, and I will explain that in a couple of minutes. Just to give you an idea of some of the architectural elements of the building, because I will talk about them a little later. As I said, it's a good example of the Art Deco style in Ottawa, characterized by certain heritage attributes such as these decorative brick panels, these decorative metal panels that you see on both the front and the north facade of the building, as well as this 2-story arched entranceway that I will discuss in greater detail later. Again, just another shot of the rear facade of the building that is proposed to be removed. And then these basement windows, which will again be discussed a little later in terms of alterations to the from the proposal. So this image shows the site plan for the proposed building. The application now includes demolition of the rear, so the west wall of the building, as well as the interior. So the interior of the building was originally proposed to be retained, and then the new building was going to be integrated into it. The applicant is now proposing basically demolition of the entire building with the exception of the north facade, the east facade, and the south facade. So demolition of the interior and the rear. The remainder of the plan is essentially the same in terms of what was proposed under the zoning amendment, which is a 6-story podium with a tower above. The proposal does require 2 minor variances. The existing height limit is 83 meters, and the applicant is seeking 84.5, so a 1.5 meter increase to the height. And they are also seeking a decrease to the soft landscaping at grade, where 16% is required. They're seeking 12%. So that will be dealt with through the Committee of Adjustment. And again, a site plan control application will also be required for this proposal. So the proposal includes reconstruction of the interior of the building, so demolition down to the facades, and then reconstruction of the floors at the same heights they are currently at, and tying that back into the original building. And this is important because we wanted to see the floor heights matching the windows of the existing building and that sort of thing. This image shows the proposed east and north elevations of the proposal. So the proposed north elevation shows the restored historic facade with the new tower set back 12.5 meters from the front. So you can see this setback here. The proposed tower is symmetrical, enhances the sense of verticality that you see in the building and is one of the heritage attributes of it. It's proposed to be clad in a bronze or a champagne-colored metal panel to complement the buff color of the historic brick on the building and the decorative metal details. The proposed north elevation you see here shows the masonry-clad podium, so it's a black brick with stone at grade, and the setback of the tower from the front facade of the Medical Arts Building. The new and the old sections of the podium, so this is obviously the historic portion of the building, and the new podium are separated by this glazed recessed gasket. And the podium matches the floor heights and datum lines of the historic building and features a similar symmetrical arrangement of the windows. This shows the proposed south elevation, so this will now go to the rear of the lot where the surface parking lot was I was speaking about earlier, and then the north elevation, which I spoke about earlier. So the building facade is much smaller on the south elevation, and then the podium, it's treated in the same manner, but it is a longer facade to match the size. So, as discussed earlier, the proposal does include demolition of the rear wall and the interior of the building. The plans on this screen illustrate the proposed shoring method. These are preliminary, and you can ignore the design of the tower up above because I believe the shoring plans were done prior to the changes to the tower. The building will be braced using a steel frame stabilized on concrete piles. The frame will be attached to the building via wood blocking in order to minimize the impact on the historic masonry, and the windows will be removed from the building and the bracing will go through the window openings. Further detail will be required on these shoring plans as if the project is approved, both through the building permit details and further requirements from staff. The anticipated timing for the bracing is 18 to 24 months. Section 11 of the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement that was prepared by Robertson Martin, page 35 of that document outlines the proposed conservation approach. That approach has been incorporated into staff's recommendations and included in the conditions that are being proposed that I will discuss in just a couple of minutes. These are just some renderings showing the proposed project when it's completed. So looking sort of northwest along Metcalfe Street. The top one is obviously a kind of a bird's eye view, I suppose. And then looking south towards the north facade. Here I'd like to speak to the bottom image because I will discuss it again in a minute. But one of the heritage attributes of this building is defined as the 6-story massing with the 7-story penthouse. And in order to accommodate the proposed tower and the construction, a portion of this penthouse volume is to be demolished and rebuilt. The existing volume includes this portion here, which is brick right now, and then the portion back here, which is currently showing as a pergola, is just a stucco-clad box. It has no real character to it. However, because the heritage attribute is defined as the 7-story penthouse, staff felt there was a real need to provide some memory of that volume and legibility, even if it is just from above. With a lot of new construction around here, the roofscape of this building will be visible, and I think this proposed amenity space will provide some memory of the historic volume of the building. Sorry, I went back the wrong direction. So in addition to as you can imagine, this is a fairly complicated project, but in addition to the proposed new construction and demolition, the end result of this project would be a proposed restoration of the historic facades. And these plans are included in the report. It's very difficult to read all that little tiny text on the screen. But just to summarize, basically, all the masonry elements are to be retained and restored. The existing windows are wooden sash windows. We are not sure if they are the original windows. There is some speculation that the original windows may have been a metal-clad wood window, and I did go and look at the at Nofke's plans at Library and Archives Canada last week just to sort of confirm, and there is no indication on the plans as to what the material of the windows is. So the applicant is proposing to replace the existing windows with a metal-clad wood, rehabilitation of all of the leaded glass windows. So there's leaded glass here, there's some above the door. So rehabilitation of all of those. Removal, restoration, and reinstatement of all the metal panels and grills. So there are a couple of metal grills here adjacent to the front door. All of these metal panels are in varying conditions of needing to be rehabilitated. And then there's two major alterations to the facade. The first is the basement windows. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to speak about the front entrance first because it leads to the basement windows. The current front entrance to this building has several steps and is not accessible. So in the interest of providing an accessible entrance to the building, the applicant is proposing to lower the front door to provide an entrance at grade. The fine details of window and door and transom arrangement have not been determined at this stage. The intention is that the front lobby of the building will be a 2-story space, so you will walk in through this 2-story entrance into a large lobby. Due to the proposed lowering of the front door, these basement windows then become half in the lobby and half in the parking garage, making them somewhat difficult or unnecessary, I guess. So the applicant has proposed to retain the window openings and infill them with a recessed masonry panel. So the memory of the windows does remain, and it is a reversible intervention down the road if that was ever the choice. And again, I'll speak a little bit more about the entrance when we get to the conditions section. The north and south elevations, the treatment in terms of conservation is the same. This does show, again, the penthouse volume that I was speaking about earlier. So where this is currently a stucco-clad box, will now be an open amenity space on the roof. The building, the applicable standards and guidelines are the same ones that you frequently see. Conserve the heritage value, do not remove, replace, or substantially alter the intact or repairable character-defining elements. So as I mentioned, the heritage value of this building is, one, its design as an Art Deco building, its associative value as a purpose-built medical arts building, and its context as a landmark in Centertown. So the proposed intervention, while significant, staff do believe that it does protect the heritage value of the building. The demolition that is proposed does not actually impact any of the heritage attributes, as the rear wall is not considered to be an attribute, and the interior of the building is not included in the designation. Fully recognizing that facade retention is not considered best practice in heritage conservation, and that's been acknowledged in the staff report, the facade is being incorporated in a meaningful way. The new structure will match the old. The podium will align with the datum lines and height of the existing building. The tower is tall, but the setback from the front facade will allow the original volume to remain legible. Just quickly, these are the guidelines that are applicable. So the use of the podium and the setback from the primary facade are appropriate. The new addition is contemporary in style and can be easily distinguished between new from old. And then the elements of the proposed podium and tower have clearly been inspired by the character of the medical arts building, as I discussed earlier. Number 18 talks about accessibility, and this is important when it comes to the front entrance. Staff at this point feel that the front entrance is an important heritage attribute of the building. That being said, the provision of an accessible entrance is equally important, and there has to be a way of incorporating both. And because of that, it is our assertion that the proposed alterations to the front entrance need further consideration. So from a consultation perspective, the ward councillor is aware of the report. She's here, obviously. The Centertown Community Association was notified. We did not receive any comments. Heritage Ottawa was notified. Its comments are included in the report, and staff feel that they have addressed many of the comments through the conditions, and neighbors within 30 meters are notified. And no comments were received. So the recommendations are to approve the application subject to the conditions, and then the normal requirements that we put in about delegated authority and expiry dates. And I'm just going to quickly run through these conditions. So the first is removal of the proposed entrance canopy and the proposed window awnings. The proposed window awnings obscure the metal panels that are a heritage attribute of the building, and staff do not feel that they are an appropriate intervention. So we are recommending removal of those. The currently proposed canopy obscures the front entrance and the metal panel above the door, which is an important heritage attribute. That being said, if there is a functional requirement for the canopy, staff would be willing to consider other options for a canopy down the road through delegated authority. The applicant has proposed to light the facade, and so we are recommending refinements to the lighting scheme in consultation with staff. Basically, we would like to know what types of fixtures and the type of installation method that's going to be chosen. This is a condition related to the front entrance, so we'd like for the applicant to explore alternatives for providing universal accessibility to the building, whether that is the front entrance or an alternate main entrance to the building. If it is the front entrance, then refinement to the alterations to look at the arrangement of transoms, the choosing of an appropriate door. The drawing on the left is from Nofke's plans, so it does give us some idea of what the original front door would have looked like. And then finally, the implementation of the conservation measures that are outlined in document 11. I won't go into big detail on those, but if there are questions, I can answer them. Documentation of the building prior to demolition. and then providing a letter of credit in an amount to be determined with staff and the applicant. But the idea of this is that given the risk associated with this project, that a letter of credit in the amount equal to the estimated cost to stabilize, repair, and restore the facade in the event of a collapse would be provided by the applicant, and it would be held by the city until the facade work is completed. And that concludes my lengthy presentation. I apologize. It's a fairly complicated project. I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, we're going to move right to public delegations, and then there'll be a chance for questions to staff afterwards. So we have 5 speakers registered. The first 2 speakers are Rod Leahy and Robert Martin. I don't know if you're coming up separately or together, as you wish.
How many speakers?
5. But
Two of these guys.
I think they're all in favor. I don't know. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very much for allowing us to make a presentation. Actually, I think Ms. Collins done an excellent presentation. I don't think I really have to add anything to it. We're here to answer to answer specific questions. I also have with me the structural engineer involved with the actual showing process. If there's specific questions to him, he can be brought forward with regards to techniques on how the facade is being held up. I also have geotechnical here as well too. I know there's concerns about building high-rise buildings in this area. I would like to say though, this is one of these projects. Quite honored to be working on this project. I've always thought it's probably one of the most important heritage buildings in Centertown, in the city of Ottawa actually. And I think our approach has been quite respectful of the building. Working with Ms. Collins during the rezoning process a number of years ago, we were making sure that the envelope that we knew that somebody would be taking this forward into development would protect the heritage building. And then we were lucky enough to get that task with a different owner. So looking forward to moving forward with this project. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions to the architect? Yes, Councillor McKinney.
Thank you, Chair. Just following up on the presentation and some of the discussions we've had, I guess when you look at that, the pictures of the shoring, they're quite, they're really shocking, really. And we'll be looking at that for at least about 18 months, I think, is what is expected. And you know, it's, I don't want to be, as I said to one of my colleagues here, I don't want to be relative about heritage, so I'm not going to compare this in any way to Somerset House. But we do have a comparison, obviously, and can you just in a bit more detail discuss how that shoring will work so that we won't get seepage into the walls? I mean, you're essentially removing the inside of the building. My understanding is that this is not facadism. Right. You are going to document what is there now and reestablish the inside of the building. But in the interim, how are you going to prevent any seepage, any deterioration of those walls? And I understand that, you know, we do have a guarantee through a letter of credit if we do get, if something does happen tragically, you know, part of the wall were to collapse, or we lose part of the heritage attributes. But if you could explain, you know, to the committee and to myself, and you know, for the benefit of the community, what exactly you're going to be able to do to ensure that we don't get deterioration over 18 months in those walls.
I think I said in two parts. So the goal is actually to create in the end a better building than what was built in terms of floor assemblies and fire rating and everything. So by removing the structure, we are having difficulty marrying the proposed tower to the old structure and differential movement between the two, and there were some concerns about how that would take place. So through the design development process, the idea was could we in fact hold up the facade, remove it, and then actually with the new construction, pour new floors to be perfectly in line where the old floors were. So windows remain the same relationship, floor to window stays there, so you stay in that same activity on the street. So the engineers come up with a fairly significant, interesting approach on basically the truss form on the outside of the building, reaching through the building at all of the window levels and then bolting the facade together. It involves piles on both sides of the wall. So we're quite comfortable with how that's being held up. I think Robert can address some of the concerns about exactly what you said, water penetration and what's being done from a conservation point of view.
With respect to protection of the defined heritage character, certainly one of our primary concerns, much like the example, or I would say bad example, of Somerset House, we've been working with the design team, and what's proposed, both in the, final version will be additional flashing and water shedding of the skyward-facing joints and architectural details. But in the interim, during those 18 or 20 months, the matrix or frame that will hold the building up, we have advised that there actually be almost a full roof that goes over the top of the exposed masonry. So while it's in its most vulnerable state, before it's connected to the new building, that there actually be this continuous protection and actually sheds water either side of the walls. So we're, working with the design team to really remove any possibility of water dribbling down the face of these masonry elements.
And it's my understanding that to date, the tallest building that has seen this type of work, this type of shoring, is 5, 6 stories?
Mm-hmm. There is the largest one that I know about is currently, you can see it in Toronto, down on I think Blue Jay Way and King Street West. It's a 5-story building, similar time period. Mm-hmm. It's been held for quite some time now. I think it's been there at least a couple of years, held in place, and they've excavated right beside it. There are examples of smaller buildings doing this. So the system does work. This will be interesting, I think. Okay. As I say, we haven't filed for the shoring yet. There's still some design issues being resolved right now. The application should be made over the next week, in hopes that after the initial approval process through the fall and winter, through the fall, that we can start doing this work in prep for spring construction start. The site plan has been applied for, and the minor variance that we're speaking to is basically it's a result of when they set the height of the 27-story height limit in this area, they were thinking of the standard 4-meter ground floor and then 3-meter floors all the way up. By matching those first 6 floors, they actually have 11-foot floor to floor, slightly higher, and so what we're asking for is to recapture that 5 feet lost through the building. So that's the reason we're still sticking to the 27 stories. It's just really just adding that additional height to make sure our lines of the podium line up with the line of the original, as opposed to slipping something in with an odd offset.
And just a last question, although this is not a heritage element, it was one of the points that led me to not support the original application was the hotel use. Yeah. In the application that came, 3 years ago, 3 and a bit years ago. My understanding is that use is no longer being contemplated. Is that correct?
That's correct. It was anticipated when the zoning was going through. There was an interested purchaser who had the idea of running it, and that actually deal sort of never came to a conclusion, and the JATCO, the group from Montreal who was doing the development, looking at it as purely as a rental building.
Okay.
It's just a rental building, yes.
So good news. I don't get the $200,000 off the holding provision, but we get a better use in that part of the downtown, so thank you.
There was a question on this side. Member Small.
Thank you. I support the project. I think it's great, and I'm looking forward to going ahead. The one thing I think is very important, the original architectural design of the building is really focused on that front entranceway, and therefore I think putting the canopy in, or whatever you want to call it, would be, I certainly support staff's comments that I just think it would be inappropriate and that you would lose that really important architectural feature. Having said that, I think my question is probably to Robert Martin. I also understand and think it's very important that from an accessibility standpoint, that the accessibility be dealt with at the front entrance, that people not be sent around somewhere else to enter, that they should be able to enter the same way everyone else does. And therefore, my question to Robert is, do you feel that can be properly done, respecting Northquay's original design intentions? Because I think that whole thing is really important.
I fully agree with your comment of the primary focus of this main entrance, and we feel very strongly that accessibility solutions shouldn't relegate someone to a side or other entrance, that we need to find solutions at a primary entrance. So to the question at hand, I'm very confident that we can detail this front entrance in a way that maintains the, if you like, datum lines and proportions of the existing entrance. There's a sort of quite a generous reveal at this entrance, and some of the discussions we've had with Rod's team have been to just create an extra sort of rib in the sort of flutes and masonry reveals that would actually demarcate that original entry level. So I would say it's a work in progress, and with staff I think we can come up with something that honors the original design intent.
Member Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too, I'm planning on supporting this recommendation. I think it's a fantastic to see this building, some effort being made to really secure a future for this building for all the reasons. But I will, just to support what Member Smallwood said about the importance of that front entrance, the questionable use of a canopy, and certainly those awnings. I don't even know if we need a motion on those, but yeah. But my question is just getting back to the shoring and the amount of Lita clay in Centertown. And is your team anticipating dealing with the possibility of encountering that as part of the process?
Well, the shoring actually will go right down to bedrock, so it basically, the piles go right down to refusal. So that takes that part of the question out. I mean, the issues that took place with the Tribeca is another issue with the sort of dewatering of the underlying clay, that are, in terms of the facade, it will be on stable rock. And then the rest of the building actually goes down to rock as well. So the issue becomes, from a soil point of view, is the water issue and on the surrounding soil. So I have actually from Patterson's, I believe, Carlos De Silva is still here, so if there's specific questions regarding soil concerns, he's here as well. But I mean, I'm not worried from the facade point of view. So.
Okay, thank you very much for coming this morning. I see no other questions. So we'll continue on our list of public delegates. James Gary is the next person on the list. Sorry, James Gary Beach. My apologies.
He's a neighbor.
Good morning. Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. I have a concern about this project and how it's going to go that relates to the fact that I own the building immediately to the north of this project. It's a 126-unit, 12-story apartment building. It was built in 1960, and it's built on a concrete raft that's 2 stories deep. This whole area of Centertown is basically a clay soil, Boston blue, Lita-type clay that extends down to the bedrock. And buildings that were built in the past had a challenge to build a foundation that would work in such soil. It turned out with excavations buildings that are 1 or 2 stories deep, that the most practical way to do that is to put in a concrete raft, and basically the building is floating on the soil. That's the way the building to the north is built. And we now have a tremendous problem with a developer wanting to do a 60-foot excavation beside a building that's floating on clay, and because it seems that it's nearly impossible to do the excavation, develop shoring that is totally waterproof, and keep the soil from compressing underneath the building. You know, if you create a route for water to escape from soil that's under load, the water escapes, the soil compresses, and the building settles. I unfortunately own another building which is a block away from where this is going to happen, and 4 or 5 years ago, Claridge came to me to build a building right adjacent to this building. It's an 11-story building. And so I own an 11-story building, and developer wants to do just what is going to happen here, do a 60-foot excavation to bedrock, all sorts of guarantees that there'd be no movement, no settlement, everything would be done properly. I'm now dealing with an 11-story building that settled 5 inches. Now try to picture an 11-story building settling 5 inches. And in the process of doing that, there was a lot of differential settlement which resulted in damage. So we have a problem to deal with this, and it hasn't been resolved yet. Now I find myself with another building adjacent to another project where a developer wants to do a 60-foot excavation. So of course I'm concerned at this project and how it's going to work. Now, I understand that this is a heritage committee, so obviously I shouldn't be addressing you totally on the issues of excavation and shoring and that kind of stuff. The heritage part of it is what we're here to talk about, right? So I'd like to suggest a proposal, an idea here. I, in the next months and in the months to come, I'm going to have to negotiate with the developer who wants to develop this property, some agreement of some kind about shoring, tiebacks, etc., and how it's going to affect my building. I'm going to try and do that in such a way that I don't have damage to my building and do the best I can. However, I perceive that the developer's problem here with this heritage building is quite challenging. The presentation that you have here to drive piles to bedrock and build a support system, support the building on 3 sides, gut out the interior, try to accommodate a new elevation so that people can get in and out of the front entrance of the building without having to climb upstairs, all these problems. It occurs to me that I would like to suggest that this committee consider and perhaps even give the developer an option as an alternative to what has been proposed here, to actually disassemble the 3 walls that are be left. Disassemble it, remove it from the site, store it, and redesign the structure so that when it is built, they can reassemble it so it looks exactly the same, and in the process of doing that, reduce all the risks that will be involved in collapsing and it not working. And I would predict that if they try to build a structure to support those walls and
support them.
I'm just giving you a 30-second warning because your time's almost up.
A 6-story high wall, it's very, very likely before it's all over, the ending won't be so pleasant. So I'd just like to suggest that you might consider recommending that that's an option that developers should have, provided, of course, everything is put back exactly where it was. And just in making a final comment, you also might consider that it might be really nice if they were going to do it that way, to set the front of the building back so it's parallel to the adjacent building, and so it matches the setback that Sobeys and Tribeca have, creating a wide streetscape between Lisgar and Nepean.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to have to stop you there.
Okay.
Because you're out of time.
I didn't know I had a time limit, but nevertheless, fair enough. I said my piece.
So thank you very much. I don't see any questions, but we'll follow up with staff afterwards. So thank you very much.
I'd like to
return to your seat.
Okay, thank you very much.
And next on our list is Martin Perez. Good morning and welcome. And you two have 5 minutes to speak.
Okay, I'll be brief. It's fairly simple. I am on 231 Lisgar Street, so I am neighbor of Gary Beach, and just wanted to voice some of my concern. Obviously, this is a very big building. I have a small house. It's not just a house; it's also my business. I'm an acupuncturist, and so my two concerns, for one, is obviously that my house probably will move based on the size of this building. So make sure that obviously everything's in place so that I'm protected. And then my second concern is that I run an acupuncture business. With all the construction that we have around the area, already has had an effect on my business. And because of noise, you can imagine people going to get acupuncture. They want to receive something that is relaxing, and when the house is shaking or there's a lot of noise, I have had some loss of business. So I understand there are bylaws. I understand for noise, but the fact that now it'll be so close to our house, I'm concerned. So I just wanted to voice my concern. I have nothing wrong with this building being built. I'm happy that they're going to keep the integrity, and I realize this is more about maybe what I'm voicing right now is a bit early, but I just wanted to voice it earlier than later. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you very much. Question from Councillor McKinney.
Hi, thank you, Chair. More a comment, Martin, than a question. In terms of the noise, and I hear you, it can be very difficult, and we, as we build in the downtown and we live in very close quarters,
yes.
The effect on neighboring properties and residents can be significant. But I want to just point out, and this is an early discussion. This will, as the building's happening, this is this would be considered an infill because it is very close to other residential properties. So the noise bylaw for infill would kick in. So although doesn't mean that they can't make noise all day long. They can only start a bit later on the weekends than normal commercial construction can. So when the time comes, we'll ensure that all of that is in place. That the noise bylaw, the most conservative noise bylaw that we have, is in place for this infill.
Okay.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you very much for coming out this morning.
Okay.
So the last speaker on our list is David Flemming. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to to support this recommendation. And we are pleased to have had the opportunity to submit our comments prior to the staff report being finalized. It's in document 13 of the staff report. This is, I think, a good example of heritage facadism and how we are trying to develop our downtown but yet preserve our built heritage. One of the things that has been mentioned by a number of people was the main entrance and the access. And I just want to offer this as a suggestion. You might want to look at what has happened with Grant House at 150 Elgin Street. It's now Becta Restaurant. And their accessible access is on the side of the building and the courtyard leading into the main building that was built behind there. And that might be an option to look at when trying to hopefully preserve the main entrance as it is rather than trying to change it. Just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you for that suggestion. Any questions from members of the committee? I see none. Thank you very much for coming out a second time on this item. Maybe I'll just kick off the questions to staff. Although not a heritage item, a couple of the public delegations expressed concerns related to construction and settling and so on. I don't know if you want to speak to that or maybe speak to those members afterwards to provide advice, but if you wanted a chance to say anything now, I wanted to give you that opportunity.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to say that at this point, obviously those are not issues that are looked at through the heritage application, but this proposal is subject to site plan control as well, and an application has been recently submitted, I believe, so those issues would be dealt with more in the fullness of time.
Okay. Any questions to staff from members? Mr. Vice Chair?
Thank you very much. One question which I have has to do with the Urban Design Review Panel review of this proposal. Presumably, this is going to be part of the site plan control application process. And my question is, has the Heritage staff developed some specific guidelines that would contribute to the Urban Design Review Panel discussions on the materiality, the form, and the detailing of the new building that is going to be coming to UDRP?
At this point, we have not, but it is something that I think would be well within, our need to do in advance of it going to the UDRP. So it hasn't been yet as far as the site plan application, but it will go, and we do attend when there is a heritage building on the agenda. So they will have the full information available to them.
The reason for that question is that this is a significant high-rise building, and the character of it, of course, is going to affect the way in which it demonstrates its respect for and complementarity to the existing facades. And so I think that I would urge you to focus on that. Having seen the massing, I think that it's a very good step forward in the approach, where you have the podium at the same height, which reinforces the sense of the massing of the Nofke building. The setbacks of the tower, of course, help to respect that. So there's a lot of good work that's been done already, but the devil's in the details, and I think that if you can work towards a set of principles to guide the architects in the final design, that would be very, very valuable. And I don't know whether it's intended to have comments on the design come back to the both Heritage Committee or not. I don't think so. But anyway, I just wanted to emphasize that part. And the other thing, if I could, Mr. Chair, just take the opportunity to thank Heritage Ottawa for their work in diligently looking at each application. We're beginning to take it for granted that their thoughtfulness will appear in front of us, but I think that they ought to be congratulated for the volunteer work that they do to make their views known to the Built Heritage Committee before we make our decision. On the application, I'm just going to say that I support it. I think that one thing which I would like to remind ourselves publicly on record here is that the pejorative word facadism is one that gets thrown around a lot as a way of rejecting a proposal. This is facadism, but it is a very good example of it. And I think that the approach that is being taken to demolish the building behind and have the floor levels equal to what the floor levels were in the building is a very, very important big move to removing the kind of conflicts that you have in the enjoyment of the exterior facades and the use of it. So having said that, I'll be supporting the application.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments to staff? Seeing none, thanks again to staff and the applicant for coming out this morning. Is the recommendation carried? Carried. Great. Thank you. Okay, so turning to other issues, no in-camera items, no notices of motion, no inquiries. So under other business, I mentioned at the start of the meeting, the Vice Chair is going to move a motion to allow us to hear a staff update on Somerset House. Mr. Vice Chair?
Yes, I'm pleased to move that the Built Heritage Subcommittee suspend the rules of procedure to receive an oral update from staff with respect to Somerset House.
Okay, is that carried? Carried. Okay, Mr. Curry, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Vice Chair, for adding this onto today's agenda. I do apologize for the tardiness of this item. However, I did have a meeting late last week with the owner of Somerset House and his agents, and information came to light that I felt I should be sharing with all members of committee. As committee recalls, last year Council issued in May 2017 approval for an addition to Somerset House. That heritage permit was issued, and that permit has a 2-year expiry in 2019 unless otherwise extended by Council. Since that time, we've been working very closely with the architect, engineer, and building code officials to prepare permit documents all throughout 2018. We also received monthly engineering reports as well. It came to light in our meeting last week that I am unfortunately not optimistic that the owner of Somerset House will be continuing with this project. Staff, therefore, will be reviewing over the coming week enforcement options that will look to ensure that public safety continues to be assured, that the building is effectively sealed for the winter, and that now all heritage attributes of the building are restored. So I wanted to provide that update to you all today. It's unfortunate news, but news that I felt compelled to share, and we will see action in the coming week or two with our bylaw and building code colleagues. Thanks. Open to questions.
Councillor McKinney.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that update. I've never been optimistic that the owner of this building was serious about moving forward. I think we've seen, while I'm not going to hold him responsible for the last 11 years, but certainly over the last several years, a negligence to allow this building to deteriorate to a point where major parts of it have had to be removed. I asked the question today of another architect who will have a building exposed for 18 months, and I believe an owner who wants to restore a building properly and is committed to the heritage aspects of the heritage value of the building, and it can be done. And I don't think it's rocket science. I don't know how to do it myself, but I think that you have to go very far to understand that there are experts in how to preserve heritage, and heritage that is sitting empty at this point. So I've never been optimistic. I'm quite frustrated. I've been frustrated for 11 years. I'm also a resident of the downtown. I go by Bank and Somerset daily. Many people do. This is one of the most important heritage buildings in our city. I think we've got two that I would point to as being particularly egregious when we look at heritage that is being allowed to deteriorate by neglect. Certainly in Councillor Fleury's ward, the Our Lady building and Somerset House. And so I am interested today in hearing. When we look back at 2 years ago, I had raised the issue of expropriation. It was not something that folks felt comfortable doing at the time, and as a result, the mayor established a task force that at least has staff going out regularly and asking for reports. So I thank you for that. I know that it's only because of that we have today's update. So I want to ask specifically about the enforcement options. One of them is to ensure that this building is protected over the winter. I'm sure anybody listening today would be very concerned that we'll be here next spring with the story of another part of that wall coming down. So I want to know exactly what staff is going to compel the owner to do to ensure that this building is properly sealed, properly braced, so that this is not happening. And the other is on the heritage attributes. I'd like to know exactly what that means. Does this mean that we can compel the owner to fix the windows, to repair the heritage elements? The building may still sit empty, but will it look like a properly preserved heritage building?
So, Chair, I'll start my response to the councillor, and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Coots to follow up. There's two streams here. One is the public safety aspect, and that is, of course, paramount in all of this. And we are receiving, as I said, monthly engineering reports and monitoring the structure of the property. Our colleagues in Building Code Services are rather alongside us. So we are in receipt of those monthly reports, and we will be ensuring that anything needs to be undertaken prior to this winter to ensure that the property does not deteriorate. On the heritage attributes front, seeing how Council had approved last May a new plan for Somerset House, along with that a restoration plan of the heritage attributes, in the last year we haven't been pursuing the active replacement or enhancement of those attributes, knowing that redevelopment was to be undertaken this year or next year. Now that doesn't appear to be the case, that is the second aspect that we will now be pursuing, such that what of the building that does remain is restored to its grandeur. And I'll ask Sally to talk about those specific aspects.
Mr. Chair, the heritage staff with building code, our property standards, inspected the building this week as part of this ongoing monitoring, and we are in the process of creating a comprehensive list of work to be done on the heritage attributes, because orders can be issued under the property standards bylaw to repair, and so we are working on that, and we expect we've identified areas of concern, etc., and we will be working with property standards for orders to be issued to ensure the preservation and conservation of the heritage attributes of the building.
And can I ask what would be a reasonable time frame for you to report back? I think that in the case of Somerset House, I don't think that we can just wait until we get new updates, new engineering reports. I think that I would like to see a more regular update to Built Heritage Subcommittee. So what would you suggest would be a reasonable time frame?
Chair, the goal is to issue those orders within, I would say, within the month, certainly, of September. So I can certainly convey that information to Council at that time. It's a matter of public record. And certainly, Councillor, we can provide an update to our next Built Heritage Subcommittee meeting in October on this.
Okay, I appreciate that. I expect that the rest of the committee would agree with that. So one last question. I do want to go back to expropriation, and we have one example in the city of a heritage property that was expropriated on King Edward. And I know that it's done in only very rare cases, and I understand why that is. Can I ask what, in staff's opinion, is the threshold here for expropriation? At what point would you have reached? Would you come back and recommend that we take a more aggressive stance and pursue expropriation?
Chair, I believe I'll start answering the question by saying that what we will be undertaking over the next few weeks will be the most aggressive actions the City of Ottawa has ever undertaken against this property. And so we will start with that aspect of issuing orders and hopefully incentivizing change of behavior and approach on the part of the owner. We are also working on the development of a financial incentives program that will be that's part of the Mayor's Task Force on Heritage Matters, and I'm hoping with Council support that will be something that will be available next year. So I really feel that it would be after viewing the success or failure of these orders and the implementation of such a program that may provide incentives to this particular owner to activate this site that the very strong tool expropriation would be considered.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Yeah. Under the Built Minimum Standards Act, if you give an order, there's a certain time, I believe, for them to do work, and then that's not when the city does it and charges it back to the property taxes. They do that with other things, I know. Is that what's going to happen in this case? You're going to give them very extensive orders of what they have to do. There will be, I hope, a timeline which is reasonable enough so it can get done before winter. If that doesn't happen, would the city then go in immediately and get that work done and charge it back to the property by putting it on the property taxes? They do that for cutting grass. I hope they can do it for saving buildings.
So yes, the City of Ottawa does have the ability to do that, Councillor. I'm not going to speculate. I'm hopeful that the owner will undertake the work we undertake, but yes, that is the last resort.
It's a last resort, but I think we need to, in this particular case, it has to be there, and we can't just play around anymore. This has been going on forever. Thank you.
Member Small?
I just wondered, do we know if there's currently water infiltration into the structure?
Councillor, competing member, I don't believe that is the case. I'd have to go back and speak to my building code colleagues, and I'll confirm that with you at October.
Okay. Thank you very much for the update, and I thought Councillor McKinney's direction was a good one. If you can plan on updating the committee at our next meeting, which I did want to address briefly before we adjourn. Right now, our scheduled next meeting is the 11th of October. There's been a request from staff to push that up a little bit because there are some deadline issues that have come into play because we're only, planning and council are only meeting once in the month of October. So we're looking at right now Thursday the 4th of October or Friday the 5th of October. I'm sure the clerk will be in touch to make sure that we have availability of the majority of the members, but I did want to alert you to that now. So we won't be meeting on 11th of October. The 4th or 5th. So we'll get back to you on that, and with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.